Former President Trump arriving at court today, watching his defense team go on offense, casting a key prosecution witness as out to extort him for money. The defense hoping to discredit Keith Davidson, the lawyer who negotiated payoffs for Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. Both threatened to go public with stories of sex with Mr. Trump ahead of the 2016 election. Mr. Trump has denied the allegations of both women and denied any advance knowledge of the payoffs. His defense team suggesting today Davidson had a habit of shaking down celebrities like Charlie Sheen for money. Davidson saying he never extorted anyone, testifying at length about his negotiations with Michael Cohen, Mr. Trump's former attorney, but admitting today he never met nor spoke to the former president. Instead, he dealt exclusively with Cohen, who he painted as desperate and despondent that then-President-elect Trump would not make him Attorney General or White House Chief of Staff, describing a phone call where Cohen lamented, "I can't believe I'm not going to Washington." Cohen saying he'd saved Trump so many times, you don't even know. Davidson testifying about Cohen, "I thought he was going to kill himself." A helpful point for the defense as it tries to cast Cohen as having an axe to grind against Mr. Trump. The former president is accused of illegally doctoring his internal records to disguise his repayments to Cohen, making Cohen's testimony critical for prosecutors, who are now seeking additional fines against Mr. Trump, saying he violated a gag order again by calling his former fixer a liar. While the defense argues the former president should be allowed to defend himself against Cohen's frequent criticism.
That I'm unconstitutionally gagged. He gagged me, so I'm not even supposed to be, I would say, talking to you because he gagged me.
The judge hasn't yet ruled, but expressed concern about Mr. Trump's statements and the effect they might have on other potential witnesses. Lester?
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.